His Excellency Wamkele Mene on TV3. My name is Alfred Okansi, and since January, we're told that trading has started on the AfCFTA. How far have we gone? And what are some of the building blocks that have been put in place to ensure that the AfCFTA dream actually comes into reality, and the measures put in place to address the concerns that some of these member countries also had before they signed on and ratified? And to also find out how many countries have ratified this AfCFTA so far. His Excellency Wamkele Mene, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you. Great. And having been in Ghana, I'm sure you've learned a few. So if I say Akwaba,
thank you very much.
You say Etiseng, you know what to say.
Oh well, I'm not there yet. Yeah. I'm not there yet. I need to spend more time in Accra.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And for the period since January 2021, we were told that trading started on the AfCFTA. What has been happening between January 1 and December for this 1 year period as we have it?
We've been doing a number of things. First, since the heads of states declared that we now start trading from the 1st of January, we've been trying to finalize on rules of origin, which is basically local content requirements. By local content, I mean for the entire continent, to establish a standard for value addition for what goods will enjoy AfCFTA preferences. There are close to 8,000 goods that are traded under the World Customs Organization harmonized system. We've been able to achieve convergence and agreement on 87.6% rules of origin. So the threshold for value addition for made in the AfCFTA has been agreed to in 87.6% rules of origin. And that's a remarkable achievement. In other fora around the world, to get to a point of convergence on rules of origin is very, very difficult. It's incredibly difficult. And so I think that this is a significant success. The 87.7% is the basis for us to trade. We want to get to 97% product coverage. We want to make sure that on 97% of products in Africa, we are trading at zero duty. And that's the directive that the heads of states gave us, that by the year 2035, 97% of products are traded zero duty. Second, this year, we have been working hard to establish a Pan-African payment and settlement system, which is now being piloted in 6 countries. We have been working on this with AfCFTA. We want to make sure that the cost of currency convertibility in Africa, that the cost is reduced, eliminated. Today, we have 42 currencies on the continent. It costs Africa $5 billion annually. This cost of $5 billion, the cost of currency convertibility. Of course, we have not calculated and made an assessment of the cost in terms of competitiveness, affordability of trade, access to trade, and the extent to which this constrains intra-Africa trade. So the payments and settlement platform is to be a very, very significant game changer. You will now, when it is operational, you will now be able to be in Ghana, transact with somebody in Kenya using local currency, Ghanaian cedi. You will not have to convert to the dollar. The counterparty in Kenya will not have to have the cost burden of converting the dollar to the Kenyan shilling. And I believe this will make trade more competitive, more efficient, and of course, more affordable. So this has been the second issue of attention this year.
I see. How does that, on that point, how does that address the fundamental issue of the cost of doing business amongst African countries, so that it's more costly for me here in Ghana to do business with someone in, say, Senegal than it is for me to do business with someone in the UK or in China. I mean, this particular measure, how does that reduce that cost of doing business amongst countries on the continent?
It does a number of things. First, it reduces the amount of money or eliminates the amount of money you have to pay per transaction, per trade transaction, converting the Ghanaian cedi into the dollar to pay somebody in Egypt who will receive the dollar and themselves have to also bear the burden of converting the dollar to the Egyptian pound. But as I said earlier, there is a bigger issue, and that is competitiveness and access to trade. Small, medium enterprises, they cannot afford the cost of trade in Africa. The cost of transactions is too high. And so this payments and settlement system seeks to address that particular challenge and to ensure that the payments and settlement system is a tool for implementation of the AfCFTA. There are other rules in this agreement relating to trade facilitation, to customs procedures, transit of goods, all of these things. All of these things lead to a high cost of doing business in Africa. We are now looking at this trade corridor, Abidjan-Lagos. We convened customs authorities, ministers of trade in Lomé in September, and we are looking at finding solutions to the challenge of transit. The fact that between Abidjan and Lagos, that it takes up to 15 days, between 12 and 15 days for goods to transit.
From the Senegal border.
Absolutely. And so we need to find, we need to look at best practice from the rest of the continent. I made an example previously that from the port of Mombasa to Kampala, a distance of 1,600 kilometers, it takes 3 days. 3 days to transit your goods from the port to Kampala. It was not always like that in East Africa. It took about 10, 12 days also there, but through investment in technology, hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure, that trade corridor is now one of the most competitive on the African continent. And so these are the other unquantifiable costs to doing business in Africa. And where we implement this agreement, where we implement it, we will be confronting directly those challenges associated with doing business on the African continent.
So what would be your own assessment of the pilot of the payment and settlement system in these 6 countries over the period and the specific timelines for it to be rolled out continent-wide?
The transactions are happening amongst these 6 countries. The last country to switch on to the platform was Nigeria. We have received very, very positive feedback about the success of the pilot. Next year here in Ghana, on the 13th of January, we will officially launch, along with our partner, of course, AfCFTA, we will launch the payments and settlement system. We will invite ministers of trade, finance, central bank governors, and of course, the president of Ghana will be there. So we want from early next year to roll out, based on the successes of the pilot, to roll out the entire system, the system to the entire continent, so that we can really see, we can start to see the benefits of trading under the AfCFTA. So
within this period, there's been a lot more of putting regulations and structures in place since January up till now. Something happened, a typical example of when Nigeria decided to close its borders. So then it raised questions about the commitment of specific countries to the AfCFTA agenda. So now companies from Ghana, small businesses, big businesses from Ghana, stranded at the border, goods got damaged as a result. How are you engaging? I mean, with a specific instance like this, how are you engaging to ensure that these differences that the countries have does not occur when we are pursuing a bigger agenda of an integrated African market?
Well, first, let me just say that even if the AfCFTA was 30, 40 years into implementation, there would still be similar challenges. If you look at the experience of the European Union, if you look at the disputes relating to trade within the EU, a single market, I think we must not expect that there will not be disputes. What we should expect is that, do we have a system of resolving those disputes to be consistent with obligations that countries undertake in that particular agreement? And the AfCFTA as an agreement is very clear on what each state party is expected to do, whether it relates to transit, trade facilitation, or any other issue. Second, we have a dispute settlement mechanism that will be invoked where a specific country has a reason to believe that they have been injured and that a violation of their rights under the agreement has taken place. That's what the dispute settlement mechanism is there for. But I wouldn't want us to expect that because of the AfCFTA, there will no longer be trade disputes. That's exactly why, even in the WTO, there's a dispute settlement body, because it is expected that trade disputes will arise of one form or the other. And so we will have to apply the rules where these disputes do arise, and apply the rules in a way that is impartial, that is competent, and that at the end of that process seeks to make sure that we uphold the integrity of the trading system in Africa. I don't expect that these things will happen overnight. I expect that it will take time. In the same way that since the establishment of the WTO, it has taken all of this time for the dispute settlement system of the WTO to be fully operational and to be fully entrenched amongst members of the WTO.
And for now, we have the right legal regime to address these concerns as they come up?
Yes, absolutely. We have a dispute settlement protocol which has established a body, the dispute settlement body, and where a dispute arises, the dispute settlement body will create a panel to adjudicate on the merits of the dispute, and to then at the end of that process to issue a ruling, sanction this country or that country, and this will be done in accordance with international law.
I see. And another concern about, for instance, dumping. Okay, and I know this is something that you've had to engage on, speak about for a while. Have you put regulations in place to assure member countries who had concerns that they would be the recipients of dumping or they will be affected by this incident should the AfCFTA roll out fully?
The agreement does have safeguards to prevent dumping of goods, import surges, to prevent goods that are subsidized from being exported to other countries. In general, we have safeguards that prevent distortions, unfair distortions in domestic markets, which would create job losses. So we have safeguard measures, preferential safeguards, global safeguards, subsidies and countervailing measures. We have built into the agreement all of these provisions to protect domestic markets from unfair competition. Of course, as we've mentioned in the previous example, these things will happen. There will be attempts at dumping. There will be attempts at exporting subsidized goods. We will have to apply the rules to make sure that where there are allegations of subsidized goods being exported, that the agreement is invoked to prevent that.
Another area is a tariff regime, for instance. So I have a tomato farmer in Ghana who is selling to neighboring countries or going to buy tomatoes from Burkina Faso, and they have to pay so much at the border to be able to transport their goods, and the related issues of extortion on the way, which is a real concern to these people. So what is the tariff regime going to be like under the AfCFTA? Are we scrapping tariffs along the various borders of the member countries that have ratified this agreement, or there will be something in place that, because that's another revenue generation area for these member countries as well. So how is the regime going to be like?
The ambition is that by the end of the 14th year, 97% of products traded in Africa are traded at zero duty. That's what the agreement states.
Zero duty.
Zero duty, 97% of products by the end of the 14th year. So we're looking at the year 2034. It's a long time from now. I believe that we should be more ambitious than that, that we should accelerate the reduction and eliminate tariffs completely on a range of the 97% products. So what will happen? We now we have agreement on 87.6% of rules of origin. 87.6% is a very good start. Line by line, that we have agreed on each product, what should be the value addition in Africa for that product to be an AfCFTA product.
I see.
It's remarkable how much we have been able to achieve convergence on these products. And once we have that, we will publish early next year the AfCFTA tariff book, so that a trader, an exporter, anywhere across the continent can click on our website, identify the product, and know what rule of origin will be applicable, what tariff will be applicable. We have a linear reduction process, a linear process of reducing and eliminating tariffs. We will eliminate tariffs in equal installments over a period of time until a country reaches zero. So there will be predictability and certainty of the tariff that is applicable. Where the challenge is, and this is the easy part, what I've described, the more difficult part, the more challenging part is the customs authorities. We have to make sure we work very closely with our customs authorities, because they are the ones who enforce the rules of origin. They are the ones who enforce the customs duties. They are the ones who ensure transit of goods in accordance with the rules. They are the ones who will prevent dumping of goods and transshipment of goods. But I'm very happy that since I've been in Accra and since I've been in this position, we have met with heads of customs authorities here in Accra 3 times this year alone. And that is a demonstration of our mutual commitment to work together with customs authorities to make sure that customs authorities are ready to implement this agreement, and are actually, the fact that they have the capacity that is required to enforce the rules of origin that we have agreed to already.
I see. And these countries have committed to the zero tariffs. And I ask this question because of the revenue aspect as well, yes. So that these countries depend on tariffs as well as a means of generating revenue, yes, for these specific countries. And they all agree that they are signing on to zero tariffs on these over 87% of the 8,000.
It is already
goods.
Agreed to. It is already agreed to. It is, the modalities were adopted by the heads of states, that on 97% of products we will reach zero duty. Where there are 2 ways in which we are addressing the challenge that you've described. many countries on our continent, and in fact around the world, rely on tariffs as a revenue generating tool. We must transition to a point where we do not rely on tariffs as a revenue generating tool, but that we rely on tariffs as an industrial development tool. If we have to use a tariff, it must be for industrial development. But that, of course, is in the long term. In the short term, we are working with AfCFTA. AfCFTA has mobilized over $1 billion, which is ready now for countries that will experience these short-term revenue losses. They will be able to access the facility. We call it the AfCFTA Adjustment Facility. Once it is adopted by heads of states in February, countries will be able to access the facility and offset those adjustment costs that will arise as a result of reducing and ultimately eliminating tariffs. So that's the short-term solution. But as I say, in the long term, we've got to adjust Africa's overall trade strategy and trade policy so that we use tariffs as an industrial development tool, whether we are talking about infant industries or if we're talking about grandfather industries. We must look at tariffs in that context. And so even the countries that know that they will suffer revenue losses, they have agreed. They've agreed to the tariff reduction timeline. But of course, we have the adjustment facility that will be available to provide the needed adjustment.
And I like the fact that you still refer to the customs as the major player here, because they are the ones who are going to implement these laws. But has there been also the concentration on developing the capacity of MSMEs to be able to meet the set demand that will come with rolling out the program or the agreement?
Well, small and medium enterprises are very important. As you know, close to 60% of Africa's GDP is derived from small and medium enterprises, creating over 450 million jobs in Africa. Very, very important part of Africa's economy. What we've seen in trade agreements, and certainly what I've seen, is trade agreements typically tend to focus on large multinational corporations. We want to change that. We want to make sure that small and medium enterprises, because of the character and the nature of Africa's economy, that small and medium enterprises are at the forefront of benefits of this agreement. That's why the payments and settlement system is so critical, because it addresses an issue of competitiveness and the cost burden in relation to small and medium enterprises. We are also, along with AfCFTA, we are creating a digital platform, Africa Trade Gateway, which will ensure that small and medium enterprises across the continent have a platform for business interconnectivity, for market access, and it will have due diligence information, it will have market-related information, it will have customs procedures. So small and medium enterprises are absolutely critical in the implementation of this agreement. That's why in my conversations with all the banks, commercial banks as well as development finance banks, I say that we need to mobilize a facility for small and medium enterprises to help small and medium enterprises to access this agreement, to get into new markets, to expand their business presence, and to ensure that they benefit from this market of 1.3 billion people.
How has the engagement been with member countries, commercial banks operating in these member countries to develop the financing mechanism for small and medium scale enterprises? Because the fundamental concern that they raise is about not having access to cheaper credit. So an MSME or micro, small and medium scale enterprise in Ghana is borrowing at 24% average. And you're going to have to compete with another MSME operating in another country on the continent that is borrowing at, say, 11% or 12%, and you are all going to have to compete in the same market. I mean, these was concerns that the likes of Nigeria had previously reason why they were putting in these protectionism policies to protect their micro, small and medium enterprises. But has there been any understanding that these commercial banks have committed to developing financing mechanisms to support micro, small and medium scale enterprises expand, scale up, and be able to compete equally?
The cost of borrowing is, of course, is high, and commercial banks, they set it at whatever rate they set it at. I had a conversation with the CEO of one of the major commercial banks in Africa, who has 25, 26 branches across the African continent, 26 countries rather. He said to me that this particular bank, they have a they have a thriving trade finance portfolio. 100% repayment, no bad loans, and specifically for SMEs that are run by women. Very impressive. The big challenge is, how do you have a cross-jurisdiction trade finance facility across 39 countries who have ratified the AfCFTA if you don't have sovereign guarantees? And that's what we're trying to work at the moment, is the risk mitigation factor. All of them want to contribute to an AfCFTA SME facility, but there's a major issue of risk mitigation that has to be solved. It will take us 3, 4, 5 years to negotiate sovereign guarantees by governments, those who are willing to do it anyway. And so I think that my sense in the conversations, my sense is that the issue is not lack of availability of funds. The issue is risk mitigation and who is going to bear the cost of the risk if we were to have an AfCFTA SME fund. So we are close in resolving that issue. I'm hoping that next year we will be able to make an announcement to Africans that we have now been able to mobilize these resources.
But you agree with those concerns that, I mean, if we allow the forces of the market to play demand and supply, and there's a commodity coming from a neighboring country that, because of their lower cost of production and impact on the lower pricing, it gets onto the market here in Ghana, and the same product is also being produced here in Ghana, certainly I would go in for that which would appeal to me in terms of price. And we have a very highly price-sensitive consumer public here in this country, and indeed across the continent. So how is the leveling being done? And that's the concern of a lot of MSMEs that I engage with personally, that they're having to now compete not only with goods from Europe and Asia, but now from other parts of the continent that are producing at a lower cost than they are doing here in Ghana.
Well, there is, of course, a direct correlation between the cost of borrowing and ultimately to the end consumer. Clearly, there's a correlation there. But I don't want to create the impression that as a trade secretariat, we have the mandate nor the capacity to now start getting into the setting of interest rates by commercial banks and or the cost of borrowing. That's not our mandate. I do accept the underlying point that you make, that there is a correlation where our mandate is to make sure that we have the trade finance available so that the goods can flow and the services can flow across borders. If we are able to achieve that within reasonable cost of borrowing, that's exactly what the type of boost that the AfCFTA will need. But I'm afraid we are constrained in terms of directing the cost, what the cost should be in country X or region X vis-a-vis country A or B. But I do accept that there absolutely is a correlation between the cost of borrowing and ultimately the goods that are traded or the goods that the consumer has to buy.
If you walk into a supermarket, 90% of the goods there are imported. And just about a fraction of it you would find as locally produced or manufactured goods. Now we're also encouraging people to patronize African products, well, African produced products. How are you, I mean, as a secretariat, going to address the reality as we have it now on most markets, where you have the local market already taken over by imported goods?
Well, first, let me just say that the AfCFTA is not about preventing third country goods from being legitimately and legally imported. What we want to achieve is competitiveness vis-a-vis those third country goods. We want to make sure that goods produced on our continent are more competitive. We discussed earlier rules of origin. Once we've been able to identify products by rules of origin, they will enjoy preferences vis-a-vis third country goods. And so they will be more competitive. So what we're trying to do is trade creation and trade diversion from third countries to focusing on the domestic market being Africa. The second component of this is industrial development and industrial and productive capacity. If we don't have productive capacity, industrial development on our continent, we will never be able to be competitive vis-a-vis those third countries. So that's why it's so very, very important that as we talk about the AfCFTA, we focus on agro-processing, we focus on the pharmaceutical sector, we focus on labor-intensive areas of Africa's economy that will produce value-added goods in Africa. It is going to take time because industrial development is not a pill that you swallow, you wake up the next day, you've industrialized. So we need to look at this as a 30 to 40 year endeavor where ultimately our continent will be globally competitive as China or India or any other part of the world. So it's going to take us time, but we need to take the first step, and that is implementation of the AfCFTA.
The agreement that you signed with China, and that got a lot of people talking about if this has to be an African-oriented dream, why then do you engage other players like China when we know their position and how critical some people are about the Chinese involvement or engagement on the continent? How do you react to this?
And I'm happy you've raised this. It's a memorandum of understanding. So we have created no legal obligations. We have provided no market access. We have given no preferences to China. We have simply said in the agreement, in the memorandum of understanding, that we have shared objectives on trade facilitation, on intra-Africa investment, on transit, and that we will work together for the benefit of Africa. We will leverage on China's experience, for example, in intellectual property rights, to make sure that we as Africans benefit, trade facilitation, and so on. And so the memorandum of understanding is not a trade agreement. It's not giving preferences.
So there is no legal obligation?
There's no legal obligation. There's no market access. There's no preferences. It simply is an aspirational cooperation arrangement, which actually is within the framework of an already existing cooperation between China and the African Union. And so the memorandum of understanding that we signed is a subsidiary instrument to the overall agreement of cooperation between China and the African Union. So I want to assure Africans that we have not given preferences to China. We have not given market access. We have not committed to any legal obligations that will place burdens on the AfCFTA and what we are seeking to achieve.
We are not a continent in isolation. We are part of a global village, as we want to call it, and what is happening globally now with, for instance, African countries suffering from travel bans as a result of COVID and the new variant and all. So this certainly must be of concern to you as a Secretary General, and how all of this could play out, I mean, going forward.
Oh, absolutely. It is of concern. I believe it's a violation of Africa's economic rights. I believe it's a violation, those countries where there are restrictions, it is a very clear violation of their economic rights. I believe it's a violation of international trade law, and I believe from a political standpoint, I have described it as despicable. It is. When you think of the fact that there are countries that have more cases of COVID-19 around the world, and those countries have not been subjected to these travel restrictions. And there are countries in Southern Africa who have 0 cases of Omicron recorded, and yet have been subjected to these travel bans. The only basis that I can see is race. That's the only basis for these travel bans that I can see. It's not explicable. You can't explain it in terms of science. You can't explain it in terms of public health. You can't explain it in any other term except the fact that these are African countries. That's really the issue that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with apartheid in public health. We're dealing with neo-colonialism. That's what we're dealing with. And we must call it out for what it is. It is racism. We've seen cartoons in newspapers in Spain that depict Africans as disease carriers of the variant. We now know there's very clear evidence that this was circulating in Europe long before it was detected in Botswana and South Africa by scientists in Botswana and South Africa who felt the obligation to the international community to share the information that they came across. And the result was the backlash that we've seen, the unjustified backlash that we've seen from these countries. It is racism. That's what it is. It's racism. You cannot tell me that countries in Europe who had high number of cases of Omicron have not been banned and have not been subject to travel restrictions, and yet countries in Southern Africa that have 0 cases are now subject to these travel restrictions. It's racism, and it's a violation of international trade law, and it's a violation of economic rights of these countries.
His Excellency Wamkele Mene, I thank you very much for this. And this has been an exclusive interview with the first Secretary General of the Secretariat of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, His Excellency Wamkele Mene, on TV3. My name is Alfred Okansi.